Hey, it's Fanuel here, your host of Questions of the Day, where I take you on my journey around the world to uncover the practice of civic science in order to understand who does what, where, when, how, and everything in between. For those returning, thank you so much for following me on this journey. And for those of you joining me for the first time, welcome aboard. So here's a question. What if our civic spaces weren't just functional, but also beautiful, immersive, and designed to unlock public imagination? Well, to explore that, we talked to Stephanie Fine Sasse, founder and executive director of the Plenary, a San Francisco-based nonprofit reimagining how people engage with knowledge, science, and one another. We caught up with her as they prepared to open up a new Civic Imagination Hub, a physical venue designed as both anchor and prototype for a new kind of participatory public space. Stephanie brings a rare blend of neuroscience, storytelling, and systems thinking to the table. We get into how she and her team design immersive, research-informed experiences and why they center agency, emotion, and art as the engines of civic learning. If you're a practitioner, listen closely to how community sandboxes and immersive storytelling help participants feel like the main character. And if you're a scholar, pay attention to their ripple metrics that Stephanie talks about. Now, something that stuck with me that Stephanie said, she said, how do we center the individual so that they are the main character in the exploration of these stories? Join me in this conversation.
Previously on Questions of the Day.
Addressing healthcare misinformation. And so the civic science media is really that media plays a very active role in being that bridge between scientists and community members. And that can be through journalism, it can be through gaming, it can be through film, storytelling, audio, all sorts of different formats, including plays, right? So we have a broad lens or broad view of media here.
Subscribe to access that conversation and many more.
Stephanie, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
Likewise, and this is not the first time, by the way, you have joined Civic Sci TV. You have actually presented before. So I want to say welcome back to the program. So, Stephanie, when I went to your website, I got absolutely inspired by the question that is posed on the landing page. In fact, it goes, what if we had more, and there's a dash there, right? Ways to explore the issues shaping our world. And these adjectives are like inspiring, energizing, meaningful, creative, connected, collaborative, beautiful ways to explore the issues shaping the world. And I feel like that question is perhaps what is driving the plenary, right? The answer to that question is what the plenary is about. So could you tell us what is your answer?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's about culture more than it is about one thing. I think a lot of us have settled into this assumption that we have to accept boring or stale or passive consumption of information as the only way that we make sense of the world. And that's just not true. We get to create whatever kind of spaces and gatherings and systems and institutions that we want. And I think we should be leaning into bringing artists together, bringing artists into that, bringing experienced designers into that, bringing storytellers, multimedia storytellers, journalists, all into that to try to figure out how to creatively make sense of the issues that are shaping our worlds and our lives. And I think we all are going to be much more likely to engage with the issues if it's in ways that align with the way we like to live and experience the world. So that's really what we're trying to do, is experiment with different ways of achieving that. And we have a few ways that we've done, but I don't think it's about one solution. I think it's about a way of designing, a way of creating, a way of bringing people together to sort of craft creative pathways through knowledge.
And so take me back to when you're in the design phase, when you said, okay, this is what we want to build, right, to try to address this problem. When you looked around, when you did your landscaping, what did you see that then told you that this is what we should be building?
That's a great question. So my background is in neuroscience and psychology research. So I spent the better part of a decade as a researcher looking at the role of emotion and decision making. I was also really interested in identity. I was interested in how our identities impact and filter the way that we make sense of the world, the way we make sense of ideas, knowledge, each other. And I got interested in synthesizing those insights and realized that there was a lot that we already knew that we weren't using. So rather than staying in the lab and continuing to sort of build our knowledge base, I got really interested in, okay, how do we use what we know from across disciplines, not just my home disciplines, but expanding even beyond those? How do we use what we know, distill some of the principles, the design principles for creating environments that are conducive to openness and change, and build real alternative solutions and systems that help to sort of create a media and knowledge ecosystem that aligns with the way we actually learn and engage with each other and ideas. So that's where it started. It started in the sciences, and then it sort of expanded from there. We took the ideas, we built these frameworks and sort of synthesized as many different disciplines as we could. And then we put it in front of people. We put it in front of educators. We put it in front of artists. We put it in front of community participants that came to our shows. And we asked for feedback, and we shaped it. And we really wanted it to be ground up in that way. We wanted it to be a sort of emergent set of solutions rather than something that felt like a continuation of the status quo or whatever inertial knowledge systems already existed. We wanted to try something new.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what feedback kind of rose to the top when you said you engaged the communities, right? What was something that kind of came to the top and told you, oh, wow, okay, I think we're barking up the right tree?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things immediately come to mind. The first is people want to be involved. I think agency is the keystone of any kind of deep, meaningful progress in these spaces. So anything you do, I think that was one of the most remarkable things. We at the Plenary tend to be very meticulous in our designs and obsess over every single detail. And one of the sort of wake up calls for us, even though we still like to do things that way, was that the standard for how complex a space has to be is pretty low. People just want to be part of it. They want to feel like it's about them. They want to have a sense of deep, true, real agency within the space. And you can create that in a huge, wide number of ways. You can do it through conversation, just creating spaces for people to talk to each other, where it's a little bit easier to connect with your neighbor or a fellow attendee than it may be out in the real world. It can be something as simple as an interactive wall. We've had interactive art pieces. For us, it's about pushing back against this sort of passive consumption of media model and saying, how do we center the participant? How do we center the individual so that they're the main character in the exploration of these stories? So that's a big piece of feedback we got. Another really big one was that art, coming from the sciences, I got a lot of pushback from a lot of peers being like, why is there so much art involved with what you're doing? And I think first of all, the research is on our side with this. I think that there's a lot of research across fields that shows creative spaces can unlock us, can sort of create openness in the way that we interpret the world. If we know we're entering a creative space, we enter with a different energy than if we think we're entering an intellectual or cognitive space. It's just a different energy that we carry with us. And so that was another big piece of feedback we got, was that participants loved leaving feeling imaginative and inspired rather than talked down to or playing into that old deficit model way of thinking. We really heard from people that they want to be in creative spaces where they can connect with each other and where they can sort of reflect and unlock their own ideas.
Yeah. Now you're based in San Francisco,
Yes.
right? And so tell us about that space, that community, right? Because you are building, I believe, right? You're building a clubhouse, right? Because now you're actually creating a physical space to be able to execute on some of your programming, which is, by the way, for those who are watching this later and listening, go to their website. There's actually a lot that's taking place. Is this clubhouse going to be the core of, if you will, for the physical work that you do? Tell us about the theory behind the clubhouse and why you're doing it.
It's a great question. In general, the way that we think about design is equal parts hyper-local and systems-wide. We're really inspired by the library model or the old Chautauqua model. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chautauquas. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Of the late 1800s into the early 1900s. In both cases, it's this model where there's a backbone that is systems wide, but then there's hyper local implementation, application, and tailoring so that communities can gather. So San Francisco for us is going to be our headquarters and our first, what we're calling Civic Imagination Hub. And so that's going to be a space where we host these interactive, immersive experiences. It's going to be a space where it becomes the primary hub for our distribution. We have one program, most of what we do is for adults. We have one program that is for classrooms, and it is in 1,600 cities across the US right now. And we're constantly trying to figure out how to expand further and make sure teachers have these resources. So this space is going to also be a distribution center for that work, as well as a headquarters for our artists, for our collaborators, for our scientists, for our team and designers to come together and think about how do we build creative pathways? How do we craft a civic culture where public imagination and collective knowledge can thrive? And for me, when I look at the way that the world has been built right now, we don't have a ton of spaces that are dedicated to that particular mission. And I think space historically we've seen is transformative. It's extremely powerful. Whether it's a library that, like the 135th branch street branch library in Harlem became a focal point for the Harlem Renaissance. There's so many examples like that across time. That Gertrude Stein's Paris salons were such a hotbed of new ideas in the arts world. I think having physical space is in and of itself a beacon, and it invites others to replicate that model, to iterate on that model in their own ways. It gives people something to connect to and gather around. So for us, it's going to be a continuation of what we've been doing, but we're also really excited to see what emerges by inviting community into the space that we're building in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And in 2023, you had the Illuminations exhibit, if you will, right? Is that right?
It's the name of the nonprofit is the Plenary, and it's funny because there's not really a great word out there for what we do. And so really at the heart of it, it's a plenary, which is the idea of that word and using that word. It's about bringing people together. One of our leading questions is, what would it look like if society held plenaries of their own? For people who may be new to that word, basically it's at many conferences and throughout different societies across time, the term plenary has been used as the primary event space or gathering where everyone should come together. Whatever's being talked about there, it's important enough that it affects all of us, and we should gather and spend time with those ideas. So we asked ourselves, what would it look like if society had plenaries of its own? If our communities, if our neighborhoods had plenaries of our own that could be hosted in churches and libraries, in our civic imagination hubs, or in our living rooms. So yes, it's an exhibit, it's a showcase, it's all of these things, but really the heart of it is we're trying to build plenaries.
Yeah. And so then someone probably listening will be wondering, okay, so how do you then, I want to say quantify the impact, but what does impact mean for you then? And how would you know whether what you're doing is actually having the intended impact?
Oh, well, I mean, you're hitting something that the scientist in me thinks about all the time. How do you measure cultural change, cultural impact? It's a long and a subtle process. And the model we're building in San Francisco, the hope is that it can be iterated upon and expanded broadly in many communities, whether that's through partnership or through more civic imagination hubs. And to get there, there's a number of researchers on our team. Astrid County is one of them, and she is a data anthropologist, and she has sort of spearheaded this idea of what we call ripple metrics. So what we're really interested in doing is trying to figure out how do we capture and measure the ripple effects of the initiatives and the experiences that we host. So we're looking at things like deep dive case studies. We, of course, have the basics. We have the feedback, the demographics, and people writing us messages. We have over 1,500, I think, testimonials now from people who participated in our events or with our resources. So there's that piece of it, and there's different kinds of cool analyses we can do there. But really, I think these deep dive case studies, and then seeing what happens when we follow up with some of them to see what do the ripples look like. So one example of that was actually from Illuminations. incredible PhD student named Jasmine McAdams that came through that show and was part of one of our community sandboxes and was really inspired by the show and came to me afterwards and was like, hey, I'm curious. I want to explore ways of looking at my dissertation work and where it overlaps with what the Plenary is doing and see if there's a way that we can properly research and explore this work. So that is, not only is that a ripple, because it inspired her to think about doing this kind of work in a new way, in her own way, this own sort of fork off of what we're doing. But it's also a research ripple, because now there's the potential there for us to investigate and interrogate exactly what we're doing and the impact it's having on people through the lens of a partner researcher. So there's a lot of things we're thinking about. I think it's an ongoing question, but I think if we loosen our grip on sort of perfectly crafted data, we're going to be able to find a lot of signal in the noise.
Yeah. And so the audience again here is the community, right?
For
when you're talking about designing this space, right? And even the Plenary, who's the audience for these things that you're building?
Yeah. Well, I think it's different initiatives have different target audiences. I think, our goal is always going to be, we want everyone to feel welcome, but that's obviously really hard to actually do. And so what we try to do is figure out for any given initiative, what is the unmet need? Who can we talk to better understand what is and is not useful? We do these things like I mentioned earlier called community sandboxes, where we gather people together from a particular community. And, community is a word where I feel like it gets used in a million different ways. For us, what we mean by that is typically it's either cross-sectional. So, one of the communities we served in Illuminations was the food and beverage industry. So we had a whole night that was just for people in San Francisco working in the food and beverage industry, and it was tailored to them. And it was everything was free. They had free food, free drinks, and they're really invited in. And we wanted to make sure that they felt important, because I think that's everything, is making sure that every single citizen, denizen, every member of our society should feel like their voice and their analysis and their imagination is important in shaping what happens to us next. So that was our priority. And that's what we mean when we say community in one sense. But the other sense is specialists. So we have the artists community, we have the scientists community, or we have the experienced designer storyteller community. But we do these sandboxes where we work with a particular community, whoever it is that we're working with, collaborating with, or serving for a particular initiative. And we talk to them about what they love, what they care about, what we're missing, where we might go terribly wrong. So it's a very collaborative process. And our goal is to create a sort of ecosystem where a wide range of communities are deeply engaged with different parts of our work.
Yeah. So I think, and this can be challenging, right? For those who, you have multiple audiences here that you're targeting and can work with, right? Depending on the project. I'm thinking of one, the I'm a Scientist project, for example, right? And then you have, in that case, this, I believe, has gone into classrooms around the country, right? Mm-hmm. So there you have an audience of educators who are coming in thinking, hey, how do I integrate this into the classroom? So key question there, is that project, first of all, still operational? And does that model kind of play into how you see the Plenary being this hub?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Thank you. So I Am a Scientist is our one, as you kind of alluded to, K-12 or K-18 focused initiative. It was co-created by Dr. Nabi Hesaglayan with me, and we launched it in 2020. And since then, it has grown rapidly. So we're now in 1,600 cities across the US. We, based on reported estimates, so this doesn't include people coming to the website and things like that, we're serving over 1 million students a year now through that program. And the goal is to capture sort of concepts of science and possible fields and careers in science by telling stories about real world scientists and their interactive, dynamic stories. We work with photographers and illustrators to really try and bring them to life, as well as our incredible digital designer, Esther Knox, who sort of creates this beautiful, dynamic, colorful interface for students to engage with. But yeah, it's definitely still up and running. We actually, last year, we launched a partnership with an IMAX, a big screen film for IMAXs called Superhuman Body. And so we're really looking at ways to partner with media like that, because that was a very successful partnership. Teachers could bring students to the film, and then throughout the year, engage them with different scientists that are doing that type of work throughout the year in deeper dive ways. And then we're also looking at city collections. So we're looking at building, starting in San Francisco and a couple of other select cities across the country, and looking at ways to take the model, which has been successful via word of mouth from teachers telling teachers, and everything's free for teachers through that program. And we've basically looked at a way to create a sort of micro version of that model so that each city that we work with can also have a sort of micro ecosystem of here's the stories and the careers possible for students in this city. Here's the people that you can learn about and break some of the stereotypes and barriers about what's possible for you as a student through the lens of your particular city and the industries or career paths that might be there for you. So again, it kind of goes back to that thing we were talking about earlier of this balance between the systems-wide planning and architecting with the hyper-local application and tailoring, and working with as many partners as we can. We try to avoid redundancy whenever possible. So really trying to figure out who's doing different pieces of this that we can work with.
And partnership, the key word you just said right now. And I want to just dig a little bit into that, because looking at your website, it actually, partnership is at the foundational level almost, right? It's fundamental to what you do. What is your philosophy around that? How do you build partnerships? And I ask this especially given the environment we're in right now, where collaboration is going to be key, right? Constrained resources, you're going to have to find a way to collaborate with someone. So how have you approached collaboration, and what are some tips that you've learned along the way?
You know, I believe the best work that is coming out of the plenary is deeply grounded in partnership, whether it is a creative collaboration with an artist who sees things differently than our team may have without them, whether it is partnering with an existing nonprofit that's doing work that is their lane, and we support them in it and they support us in ours. These relationships, I think the sort of interstitial tissue around the work that we all do requires attention and intention to a degree that we haven't always been able to achieve. And I think for us, that's exactly what you said. That is a critical piece of our work. I think collaboration, you know, we've been tricked. I could go on a long tangent about my feelings on this. I feel like we've been tricked into thinking that we are in competition. This sort of scarcity mindset that you hear about with a lot of nonprofits and a lot of people doing this sort of mission-driven work. I'm not interested in that. I am interested in building together. I'm interested in understanding who's doing what and how do we converge and coalesce and build in unison, if not in unison, at least in harmony, so that we can be aware of what each other is doing and where we can sort of support one another's work and uplift each other, because I really believe that that is how this work is going to get done. And one of the big roots and drivers, sort of catalysts of creating the plenary in the first place, was this frustration with silos and this feeling that the artists that had such a tremendous amount of creative inquiry and insight were not being held to the same sort of esteem and regard in intellectual spaces as scientists. And scientists were not necessarily in conversation with storytellers and all of these different groups of people who held so much wisdom, and practitioners on the ground doing community work and community organizing. These were all groups that held so much wisdom on a particular issue or topic or approach, and yet so rarely were they being brought together to talk to each other. And so that's what we started to do. That was one of the first projects that we started was, okay, how do we bring people who are experts in learning design, experts in exhibit design into the same space to create what was our first exhibit, It's Only Human, back in 2016. And we saw, one of the most remarkable things about that was when our team walked into that warehouse, which was in Somerville, Massachusetts, back in 2016. When we walked into that space, everything was held with equal regard. The art, the story, the science, the community, the participants. It wasn't about passive consumption. It was just as much, there's drinks and music and lounges and places for you to sit and enjoy and be with ideas and with each other. And I think that work of figuring out how do we build a proper collaborative ecosystem is our best path forward and essential if we want to get anywhere worth going.
And hence you're creating this physical space, right, in San Francisco, to try to break down the silos, to bring the local community and practitioners, creators, right, to say, let's build together in space, in community. Right?
Exactly. I think a huge part of it. And I think the other big part of it is we need space to imagine. I mean, we can get so tethered to the moment. It's really easy to get stuck in the sort of minutia, the battles of the status quo. And I think as a collective of people chasing well-being for people on the planet, I think it's essential for us to demand and pause and take up space where the goal is to imagine.
Yeah.
And civic imagination has become a really core tenet of the way that we approach our work. And to me, that means fostering informed imagination, bringing people together to exchange ideas, and creating spaces that are beacons for that work.
Yeah. Now, I think this is courageous to do. You're building a physical space to try and do this, because some people might be listening saying, whoa, I mean, this is going to be an expensive endeavor. Overhead is going to be absolutely ridiculous. And then I love the idea you're talking about having replicating this model, right? I know you were talking about I'm a scientist, but you asked the question, imagine the Plenary across different in your community, right? Across different cities. And have you thought about that? Like the model here is what you're trying to do in San Francisco going to be replicable, because the physical space it's hard to sort of do that again somewhere else, right? Unless you have really great partners, which I suspect is part of your plan. But what pushback have you received on this, both internally and externally?
Well, it's a great question. It's a very real question. And I think there's a couple pieces to this. The first is, yes, it's expensive and it's a lot. And when you look at the larger picture of how much things cost, it's just a tiny drop. So some of this is framing and thinking about, how do we double down on committing to building a civic culture that we really all can thrive in and be part of and feel heard in and feel like we have access to the ideas that we're then voting on later. So I think in terms of the potential impact and the dividends that this type of work can pay, it's a relatively small investment. But in the day-to-day, it's still a lot of resources required to get something like this off of the ground. And we've been doing this about 10 to 12 years, and we have been doing this for a while and iterating and experimenting. And now we feel ready to do that kind of scaling work that you're talking about, and to sort of figure out what does the model look like where we're not in experiment mode anymore. We'll always be in iterative mode, but we're not in experiment mode. Now we're in, let's start laying this out and inviting people in and trying to give it the sort of life and energy it needs to become an organism of its own. I mean, I think there's a lot of different people pursuing this sort of informed, creative, imaginative civic culture in different ways. And one of my big interests is bringing us together, because if we're pooling our resources and supporting each other, it's less burden on each of us in order to sort of secure the resources that we need. So yes, we definitely want this to be a model that is replicable. And I think in terms of pushback, the biggest pushback tends to be from people who get stuck, which I completely understand this. We actually have an exhibit about this called Okay, But Why? How easy it is to get stuck in the way things have been and how hard it can be to sort of let go of your assumptions about how systems operate and work, and kind of forget that things can change, that they have changed, that when you look at history and you look at the systems we have today, a lot of them are actually quite young. And when we look at the library system, for example, that was one guy that really gave it the initial catalytic boost in the early 1900s that then led to a system of libraries where I believe we have over 18,000 libraries across the United States now. A lot can be built if we decide to build it. And I think when I do get that pushback of like, woof, this is big, lofty ideas. Well, we need big, lofty ideas. And we need to bring each other together to pursue them in concert. And I think I'm really excited by that challenge. So there are always going to be people that push back, and there's always going to be funders that are reluctant and hesitant to take the risk. But I think we're in an era where that risk taking is essential to future building.
Yeah, it's needed now more than ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that case, wow. I get. Where did the time go?
Always in our conversations.
Always our conversations. Yeah. So as we wrap up this conversation in mind, we're going to have you back. We're going to continue this because there's so much we can dissect, right? I want to go back to this original word, the partnerships.
Mhm.
Those who are listening here are probably wondering, okay, I want to partner with you, Stephanie. Okay, I want to figure out how can I work with the Plenary. What are areas within what you're doing right now that are plug-in points for them to consider, so that when they email you, they can kind of be specific on ways? Maybe it's a funder, right? And you have a gap in project Y, right? So can you give us a few of some things that are plug-in points for others to consider?
Absolutely. So we are always looking at building our sort of database of specialists in different spaces. So whether you are a specialist, whether you're an artist or a storyteller, an artist we use broadly too. So that might be video arts, that might be immersive arts, or XR, that might be more sort of fine arts or sculpture, whatever your sort of creative mode of expression is. If the idea of creative sense making and helping the public engage with critical civic ideas and science through your lens is interesting to you, let us know. We'd love to add you to the list of people who are interested in partnering and collaborating with us. And so that's a big one. Or if you represent a network of people in that category. Same with scientists. If your work is relevant to public understanding of some of these critical issues that we're up against, we want to hear from you. If you work in communities across these spaces, if you work in, and when I say these spaces, we really sort of focus on what we call world shaping issues, which tend to be things related to sustainability, human systems, which is like bias and sense making and interpersonal relationships. We focus on nature of knowledge, which is related to media systems and misinformation a lot. And then we focus on STEM. So science, tech are really big parts of our work as well. So if you're an expert in those spaces, a community practitioner working in those spaces, if you think a lot about sort of future building and imagining possible futures relevant to those spaces, helping to unlock public imagination around those sort of possible horizons and helping to bring them into resolution, we want to know about you. If you are doing that work in your own organization, we want to know about you. How can we support you? And so there's a pretty wide range of ways to plug in. For I Am a Scientist specifically, we are always looking for we have a lot of scientists that are interested in being featured. That's less of a need. The bigger needs tend to be educators helping to spread the word, because it is grassroots. It's about people telling people as much as possible. We're always looking for science storytellers. There's a pretty wide range of ways that you can sort of plug in. And then the last piece is, of course, funding. So we're always looking for partners and funders that really care about the same mission, this idea of reshaping and rethinking civic culture so that it centers knowledge and agency and imagination and relationships. And we feel like in the past 10 years, we've built a model that can do that quite well. And we're a very, as you know, very research-driven organization as well. So we started with research and we still apply research principles to the way that we design. So we're always looking for people to help. We actually have, today, we are launching our Clubhouse fundraiser as well. So if anybody listening is excited by what we're talking about and can give $5, $10, $5 million, whatever you got, to help get that space into the form that we think will be a vehicle for the kind of impact and change that we're chasing. And we would love to have your support. So.
Wow, I think we have unearthed so many questions, Stephanie, right? And a lot of answers, but even more questions that others can follow up on.
I'd love that. Yes.
Because we're going to follow up on those for sure and keep track of the Plenary and what you're doing, what you're learning. And I think there was a ton of information today, a snippet of what you're learning. I know this. So we're going to have you back very soon. Stephanie, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you for everything you're doing. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you, and it's a point of inspiration for me seeing what you're doing as well. So thank you for having me.